problem is that you could have a school attendance that's 92, 93% on an average daily basis and have up to 1/5 of your kids missing a month or more of school. We saw how devastating the pandemic could be to kids when schools were closed. Kids that chronically absent were having sort of mini pandemics for years.
Welcome to this session, the World Education Summit 2024, when we're going to look at absenteeism. And I'm just delighted to have in the studio Professor Robert Balfanz from Johns Hopkins University. Hello, Bob. We'll call you Bob from now on, if that's okay.
Wonderful. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. He's co-director of the is it Directorate or Department for Social Organisation of Schools at Johns Hopkins University, director of Everyone Graduates, which is a massive project that you ran out there, co-founded the Diploma Now, which focuses very much on middle and high school pupils and looking at early warning signs. And I'm going to guess that would fit in with the absenteeism as well, but we'll get into the detail of that in a second. And then with a focus on school reform, chronic absenteeism, school climate, and instructional interventions as well. You were eminently qualified to talk on this subject, Bob. Can we start? What do you kind of classify as absenteeism? Because I think it's always good to define this. And then what are you actually seeing in terms of the patterns?
Yeah, so this is a really important point because we tend to talk about it in two different ways and it gets us all confused. So historically, when folks talked about school attendance, they were saying what percent of our kids who are enrolled are in the building on a given day. So, and typically people would have something in the 90s, right? That 92, 93, 95% of our kids enrolled are here today. That's average daily attendance.
And that's still a statistic we get in England,
Okay, right. So that's still it, right? And, since we all went to school, we're all hardwired that anything in the 90s is good. We're good. Attendance is good. And our literacy rates are not so good. So let's worry about improving literacy and let attendance be as it is. The problem is that you could have a school attendance that's 92, 93% on an average daily basis and have up to 1/5 of your kids missing a month or more of school. And oftentimes it's the kids that are missing a month or more of school, not surprisingly, who might be struggling on literacy. So we go about trying to do our literacy intervention, and it has just sort of middling results. And we're like, that was sort of disappointing. Let's try something else. Not recognizing that the kids who need the intervention, they are on a regular enough basis to benefit from it. So more recently, places in maybe the last decade or so are recognizing that we really also have to track something which is often called chronic absenteeism. And that's when a student misses 10% or more of the school year. And I know school years vary all across the world. And so maybe that percentage might have to vary if you have a very long or very short school year. But like here in the United States, it's 180 days. If you miss 10% of them, that's missing 18 days of school. It's essentially a month. And I always use that as a good marker. We can all understand if a kid misses a month of school, that's not a good thing. And it's not going to be so easy to be as successful in school as you could be, or even just to connect with your peers and your teachers if you're missing a month of school. And the reason it's even more challenging is schools are often set up if kids know or something happens and they miss a big block of time consecutively, right? If you get a serious illness, if you break your leg in 3 places and can't walk, the schools will arrange and give you your work and will try to make you stay on top of things because they know you're going to be out for 2 or 3 weeks. With chronic absenteeism, why it is so problematic is kids are missing 1 day here, 1 day there. They missed a Tuesday the first week, or Thursday the next week. And before anybody even realizes that the kid has missed a lot of school, it's a couple months later, and no one remembers what they did that Tuesday in October when they weren't there. They have no way to help catch them up because no one even remembers what they missed.
So I'm presuming what happens there is the habit starts developing, right? Where number one, the school aren't really noticing it, or if they are noticing it, they're not noticing the patterns to it as instantly as they may do. And then secondly, it becomes habitual, and I guess those students become adept at finding other ways to miss school.
Yeah, and it's both things. I mean, some kids miss school because it's sort of a they're avoiding something, or they don't see the point. So it's sort of a choice. Other kids are missing schools because there's actual barriers in the way. And you either have to ultimately change your behavior or solve a problem. But if you don't recognize it for a long time, you're right. It gets ingrained. It becomes, and the truth is that if a kid is chronically absent, the odds are they'll continue to be chronically absent unless it was just a one-time thing. There was the family moved, there was a job loss, there was an illness in the family, there was like a one-time 1-year shock. That's a different category that often resolves itself. But in many cases, those things that were there, either they grow or they stay the same. And then, if you look back at a kid's record, you'll often find that kids that are chronically absent this year were chronically absent the past 3 years also. And when you add that up, we have kids that, over time are missing a whole year of school. Right?
I know I'm going to put a supposition in here, but these will be the kids who are perhaps struggling a bit more at school. And
absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
And even, in many ways, academically, often behaviorally, because they don't have that, they've lost that connection with their peers and their teachers.
Right. And I guess when we talk about narrowing the gap, these are the ones that are probably most in need of the narrowing the gap. And then we end up increasing efforts in other areas rather than in this absolutely crucial zone. Yes. Could you talk just a little bit about the direct and indirect effects then on the students, on the students who are chronically absent, in terms of the progression becomes obvious, but I'm wondering what wider effects and what indirect effects, perhaps longitudinal.
Yeah. So the short-term effects are that you're not in a classroom, so you miss the pace of what's going on and what's expected of you. And oftentimes what that means is you might not turn some of your assignments in. And so, and again, and many kids aren't really recognizing, because it's a day here, a day there, it adds up, and they're not even fully aware of how much they're missing. And so, they're still doing okay in their class. They're still maybe barely passing the final exam. They maybe turned in their big project. But what they don't recognize is they didn't turn in 5 assignments. And for those 5 assignments, in many cases, they get zeros, not turned in. And when they average all that together, the barely passing becomes failing. And then students are like, but I passed the test, I got the project in, and you failed me. It must be because you don't like me. Well, if you don't like me, then I'm going to come to school even less, right? And then it sort of snowballs. And then, of course, the long-term effect is that we know that kids that are chronically absent are less likely to graduate. If they graduate, they're less likely to go on to post-secondary. There's also assorted, health and other emotional, social effects of just being out of school, as we saw in the pandemic, right? I mean, that's the other thing to remind ourselves is that we saw how devastating the pandemic could be to kids when schools were closed. Kids that chronically absent were having sort of mini pandemics for years.
And I know that if we take this on further, and I was looking at a very worrying statistic that I saw that 66%, so around about 2/3 of students, are in classes where there are 5 or more chronically absent students. And so what's the effect on those students who are coming to school?
Right. So this is one of those things that just flies under the radar in ways that is not good, which is that from the research we and others have done is once 20% of kids in a school are chronically absent, meaning they're missing 10% of school or about a month or more, that impacts the whole school. Even the kids that show up every day are impacted by that. And the most direct reason is think where it puts a teacher. It means they have a different group of kids in their classroom every day at some level. So they either have to say, let me remind you what we did yesterday, and then lose the kids who are there. Maybe they start talking or acting out. Then you have to stop and redirect them and you lose more time. Or you say, if you weren't here, ask a friend. I have to move on. And then you lose those kids. They might act out and you have to stop and redirect. And so you're losing just instructional time is slowed down or delayed because you're having to deal with this different mix of kids in the classroom every day. And then also there are these socialization effects that, maybe the kids start picking on the kid that wasn't there. And then that kid acts out, obviously. And then, it's harder for them to actually get a relationship with their teacher, which we know is so important. And even, one I've seen, and it's a makes total human sense, but you could still see where it becomes problematic is that, teachers are frustrated that their kids are not there on a regular basis. They want them in on a regular basis. They feel how it's, impacting their classroom. And so when a kid, that's here and there, is there for a day, They might be a little sarcastic. Oh, it's so good to see you today. Wow, I better play the lottery. It's my lucky day, and they're not trying to be mean. They're just frustrated. They're just expressing that human emotion. But for that kid, maybe that kid has actually had to overcome barriers to get there. Maybe it wasn't a kid that was just like, I don't feel like it. I'm not there. It was like, I'm actually taking care of my grandmother who raised me, and I don't think there's anyone else to help her with her medication. And, so I feel at some level I'm being heroic, and you're telling me that like, I'm sort of a joke, right? So now it's even more reason for me not to come.
Can I just go into that a little bit, into the causes, because it'd be interesting to hear the research in this for schools, because I think a lot of the time these causes are underlying what they're seeing as behaviours, and I'm just wondering would it help just to kind of pull those ones out? So what causes students to become chronically absent?
Yeah, so we've sort of organized this into 4 broad buckets, right? So there are some things that where kids absent something happening out of school, they would be in school. This is often, again, for maybe high school, secondary kids who have to work to help support the family, make sure they pay the electric bill that month. We know during the pandemic, a lot of teenagers took jobs because one parent was laid off or whatever, and they sort of did all that delivery service we all depended upon. And the interesting side thing about that in the United States, I don't know if it's true in other places, is that coincided in the United States with a big increase in the minimum wage in many places. And so suddenly these kids were making, the US was like $15 an hour, which was twice what that job might have paid a couple of years before. For a 16, 17-year-old, that was like not bad money, and so suddenly it's like, I'm helping the family, I'm fighting the pandemic, I'm making good money, and I could do all my assignments in the evening because they just send me my assignments to do for the week. I could, go to school in the day, work in the day, do at school at night. Then when school comes back, I can't do both at the same time, but some try. Like I'll work 2 days and I'll go to school 3 days, see if that works, and it doesn't work out. So there are, things to keep you out of school. The other one is caregiving responsibilities. This is often more on the girls' side, but not always, that younger siblings, like parents leave early to go to work, or it's a single family household, and the older child is responsible to get the younger child to school. And once they do that, they know they're going to be late to their school. And sometimes when you're late to school, they sort of yell at you. And you're like, well, got to get my sister to school. I missed the bus. I'm late. Instead of being yelled at, I'll just be sick today, right? And that's a combination of factors. And we know there's also a lot of elder care sometimes. Again, like multi-generational households, and folks that help raise you now need help. So those are the pull-out factors. Other one that's big and has got much bigger is you're avoiding something in school. Being teased, you're being bullied. Sometimes it's silly. You didn't get your assignment done, and the teacher will yell at you because you didn't get it done. But we know social anxiety has spiked post-pandemic, right? And oftentimes it's kids that got caught between levels. So they were like in elementary school, and then they were suddenly had to find themselves in the middle grades, and they didn't know any kids, any adults, nothing, and it made it worse. So it's avoidance factors. Then there's kids that, again, pretty more high school than not, but not always, who just like sort of decided that the job they're going to get is going to be more or less the same, whether they graduate or not, whether they go to school every day or not. They think they can get by on the 4-day-a-week plan because they have a lot of stuff going on, and they're just disengaged, right? They're just going through the motions. They're trying to endure it for as long as they can, and they're balancing that by missing some school. And then the last one is interesting, which is that somewhat, I would say, like not fully aware of like the magnitude of the consequences. So we found that both parents and students often underestimate how much school they missed by about half. And the reason for this is that we think sort of short term, and if I ask you, do you go to school every day? How often do you go to school most days? People tend to think about the last month as a reference point. Oh yeah, last month I missed that Tuesday, and oh yeah, I think there was a Thursday, but yeah, I go to school pretty much every day. And that was just 2 days, but if you miss 2 days a month for 10 months, you miss 20 days. So it can creep up on you in a way, is sort of the fourth category. So it's sort of stuff pulling you out, stuff you're avoiding. You sort of like don't see the point, and you don't recognize how much you're missing. Are sort of the broad different categories.
And I'm guessing this, in some cases, must be multi-generational. So it's what's
Right.
been patterned.
Yeah, right. And
History.
and also that, parents that didn't enjoy school, parents that didn't feel welcome in school aren't rushing to sort of say, "Oh yeah, you got to be there every day because it's a wonderful place."
Absolutely. So just to take that on then, so is this well, it was increasing according to the data that I saw, hence we're talking about it now. So, is it, but if you take it over time, is absenteeism always run at these rates? Is this a particularly high spike?
Yeah, no. So what we've seen, and again, I know the data from the U.S. well, although I have seen articles from I think both Ireland and the UK, is pre-pandemic, this was chronic absenteeism at some level followed poverty. Like it was highest in places that had high poverty, and you can imagine those are the places where more of those things I talked about are more likely to be true. Post-pandemic, and this we see in the United States, why it's been very concerning, is it's spread everywhere. It's like in rural places, it's in towns, it's in the suburbs. We just put out a map yesterday I live in the state of Maryland. It has 32 school districts across the whole state. And every single one of those in 21-22, sort of the first full year post-pandemic, had either 20% or 30% chronic absenteeism rates in the school district. So we've seen that post-pandemic, it's spread sort of everywhere. And you can imagine that the pandemic increased all those things. It increased, in the United States, tragically, we know it's 300,000 kids lost a primary caregiver. That's a lot of family dislocation where older kids are taking on more family responsibilities because they've lost a parent. We know increased teenage working in the U.S. Increased the social anxiety. It increased, so we're seeing it's spread to places that hadn't experienced it before. In many ways, that's very challenging for them because it's like, why are our kids not coming anymore? Like, what's going on? And since they weren't used to it, many get overwhelmed because if you think about it, if you have like a 600 student school with a 20% chronic absenteeism rate, that's 120 kids. That's a lot of kids. A common strategy has always been like, well, call the parents and, say, why aren't you, how do we get your kid to school today? Or, can we get them there tomorrow? Who's going to make 120 phone calls a day? Right? If you would assign a person to it, they would literally be on the phone the whole school year. They would never just have to call and call and call. So that's been a big challenge, is that when it gets to this high number, it can be really, in a sense, overwhelmed if folks are not used to sort of dealing with it.
Right. So should we move on to dealing with it then? I'm going to guess that's going to depend on what type of absenteeism. Yeah. But if we look at it, some of the approaches on an individual level, then we get to whole school level, and then we look at system level. I mean, I think that'd be useful. And at the same time, if you could point out some of the things you see doing that don't work, as in they don't work on an evidence base. Yeah. They may work in the odd occasion, but because I think a lot of this happens in school. We tend to have so many approaches to so many things for the best will in the world, but it's often the ingredients we're using aren't the ones that are going to bring us the highest impact.
Yeah. So I'll start. So one thing that folks have got to, sometimes it's just, schools have just got to reorientate their thinking, and, right or wrong, it is what it is that, traditionally people would say, if a student doesn't want to be here on a regular basis, if parents can't get kids here on a regular basis, that's not really my problem. I teach the kids who come, right? I'm a teacher. I have a subject. I teach. I don't recruit kids to come to school every day. Maybe we'll hire a specialist for that. But the problem again is if you hire one specialist and you have 120 kids, it doesn't work. At that level, it's sort of an all hands on deck approach. And particularly because we know some of the solutions involve relationships. So we know that, kids that are avoiding things, kids that are not seeing the point so much anymore, and even kids that have barriers, they're not going to tell you what the barrier is unless they trust you. They're not going to come forth and say, well, yeah, I'm taking care of my grandmother, because they might feel like you won't let them do it. Like you might try to tell them, oh, that's not appropriate. And, So we know from the evidence that one of the things that really helps kids come to school more, it's this idea called school connectedness. And it's one hand, it's really simple. On the other hand, it's challenging to do, which is we know kids are connected to school when they believe there's at least an adult who knows them and cares about them as a person, right? You're not just a factory that you're the thing that I'm here to work on, but it's like, I know about you. I know you as a person. And you believe, the kid believes that I want you to succeed. Secondly, that you have a supportive peer group, that you have some friends and some that you can lean on. That helps with a lot of the avoidance, the bullying, the teasing, things like that. Third, and this one surprises people, that at least sometimes you feel like you're engaged in a pro-social activity, which means you believe what you're doing is helping somebody else. And oftentimes we tell kids, especially secondary, it's your future. It's about you. If you're not here every day, you won't have a future. And they hear that, but sometimes they'd be more attracted to say, we need you here so we can do this thing that will help other people. Like that could be a more appealing hook than like, it's you. And then
that's the pensioner research as well, didn't it? That you go through various phases. Yes. And so only when you get to the last phase of giving, recognizing there's a hole out there and giving back, right, people feel fulfilled again. So yeah, absolutely.
And then the last one is you feel welcome in school for who you are. You don't have to feel like you have to be somebody else to be in school. Those are all things that schools can readily sort of actually track and respond to, but it's not built into the DNA of school to do that.
Absolutely. Right? You mentioned tracking there. I'm just wondering how you see schools tracking those things. Is that through surveys? Is it?
Yeah. So it's through some surveys, and the one that I think is I've seen as very appealing and is very quick is we give these things fancy names in academics, whatever. So it's a relationship audit, but all this means is that teachers that work with, maybe a grade level group of teachers, or if you're in like a small learning community, or if you're like in a thematic strand, a group of teachers that somehow, to some degree, share a group of students. You just put the roll up, and teachers go by and they could have like 3 stickers, like don't know the student, know them by name but not much more, have an actual relationship with them. It takes 15 minutes to do that. You rapidly see, here are the 20 kids that have no stickers. Nobody even knows their name, at some level, except for their classroom teachers, but nobody else. And then you can see, like, okay, let's try to build relationships with those kids. And 6 months later, have we made progress? So that's like, it's actually like trackable. Oftentimes it means,
I'm going to guess that the identification of some of these students are going to be the more awkward ones, shall we say, or the ones that struggle with relationships for various reasons. Right. So how do you practically they've done the audit, they now know who the students are. What creative ways have you seen them doing?
So the one that I also like is that they will do a quick survey of hobbies, just things you enjoy doing like outside of school. And that often finds unexpected connections, because you find like, I like knitting, and here's a kid that I would never believe in 100 years also likes knitting, or I like anime. Here's a kid who likes anime. Like you find then it's like, oh, now you have something to connect on. Because you're right, you can't randomly say, here's 20 kids, go form a relationship with them. Like, again, that is too much to expect of teachers. Like just to say like, out of the blue, I've been assigned to be your, to be your buddy. It doesn't. A certain age, for an elementary kid, that might work great, but for like older kids, it won't. So there are ways to sort of find connections to build a relationship. And then the final one for both kids and teachers is just doing shared activities. It is doing some of those like service activities or something, where again you can that's a threefer, right? You're connecting with kids and teachers. You're doing something good for others, and you're sort of feeling welcome for who you are, because you're all sort of there helping out in some way.
I've not heard that expression before, a threefer. I like that one. Very, very direct and beautiful benefits from that. So there's plenty we can do. Now I'm just going to put it to you here, because I did quite a bit of research into behaviour management approaches within schools. Yeah. And what came out was there's 3 definite patterns there. Some people believed in rewards and sanctions. You can kind of get that.
Yeah.
But it was schools' responsibility. Some believed it was about climate and culture and how do we grow the climate and culture. Others believed it was much more about building individual relational trust across individuals in your class. And you can almost see once you did the testing that people tended to fit into one of those three, although they would have a second preference. And I'm just wondering how, because then the responsibility obviously ends up with those who are good at building relationships.
Yeah. Well, I think all of those things, so we can go through them one by one in a second. All of those things can work in the right circumstances. And that's why the first thing that's important for schools to do is to try to figure out in a broad thing, like, just even use those 4 buckets. How many of our kids are in them? How many kids are like being, have a barrier? How many kids are avoiding? How many kids don't see the point? How many kids like aren't aware, right? Because it's going to vary by place how big those buckets are, and those different approaches you just listed work better for some of those categories than others. So let's go with like incentives and sanctions. Incentives can work a little because we're all human, and we respond to incentives and even sanctions in a way. But they can be challenging because once you go down that route, you have to maintain it. So often things will have like, and that needs to be short so the kids can have control over it. That's the other things we've learned about incentives. If kids feel like they can't control the action, the incentive doesn't do much good for them, right? So you often want to make it like, the students with improved attendance, or the students or the homeroom that does the best this week. Because if you just always recognize the top attenders, we've actually saw 2 things. One is like they're already top attenders. They don't need recognition at some level. And 2, in a weird way, they're like, wow, I'm an outlier for coming to school every day. Like, I could actually miss a few days because like they're telling me I'm like the one of the few that come every day. So you have to get the incentive right, and that's a challenge. And you have to be able to sustain it, because oftentimes what happens when they do like simple rewards is they'll do it for 3 weeks and they'll be busy the 4th week and they won't do it. And then the final thing people did find is if you're going to go down the rewards route, is that social rewards work better over time than stuff. Than like some have point systems. You earn so many points, you go to the school store, you get stickers or whatever, or a notebook. But simple things like just recognition of like, here are the kids, that have done things, or even collectively like a homeroom, because then the homeroom is all trying to work together to come. On the sanction side, and again, I know all countries vary on this, but in the U.S. there are still places where if you reach a certain number of unexcused absences, and I should go back a step. When we talk about like chronic absenteeism, it's excused and unexcused. It doesn't matter the reason. It's just you missed the day, and that's what we found matters. Just how many days did you miss? Reasons can matter for solutions, but missing for an excused day and an unexcused day doesn't matter that much if they all contribute to you missing a month of school. So in the States, we have a thing. If you miss, and it varies greatly by place. Some places it could be like just 3 days are unexcused, or 7 days, or 10 days. The school can refer you to the court, and the court can take action against the kid if they're older, or the parents if they're younger. And the evidence is really strong is that doesn't work.
Doesn't work, right?
Because it's like in many cases they're not things the parents can easily necessarily always control, especially if the kids are a little older, or if the kids are a little older, they don't connect the two. They just, again, think you're being mean to them, that you're not like, it doesn't. And in the US, it's very capricious how it's applied, because it varies by place, and also the school's got to initiate the action. And some schools will never initiate the action, and some schools will always initiate the action because so that's that one. We sort of talked about the relationships, and remind me what the middle category was.
So was that the personal relationships or with school climate? How do you change
school climate? Yes,
climate to build it, to make it more about belonging, I guess.
No, school climate is important. Again, making school a place kids want to be is real. Again, people don't always want to believe that. They think like school is a place where you learn. It's not always fun. Show up, be quiet, do your work, and move ahead. But, we are human, and we all do better and thrive more in a place that is where we feel welcome and belonging, and where we feel safe and secure. And here's the key thing I have to tell people is that there are discretionary decisions kids make about going to school that day or not. They can be compounded by your economic level, your economic situation, because it can make it more challenging with less resources. So you come across that more often. So again, I recognize this varies greatly by country, but in the U.S., in lower economic households and whatever, they often don't have like great rain gear or great winter gear, especially places where like that weather is not every day. It's somewhat infrequent, but it's not never. And it often means if it's a very rainy day or a very cold day, you've got to be wet or cold to go to school. Like you were either going to get wet waiting for a bus because you may be taking mass transit and maybe like you have to change lines, or you're walking, but it's close to a mile and it's wet and cold. So, if you believe that not much is going on in school and nobody knows you and nobody cares, it's rational not to get wet or be cold to get there on that day. If you believe there's people who are going to miss me, I got friends that are going to like be sad that I'm not there, I'm going to miss this cool activity, and it's going to be I'm going to feel good when I get to school, you're okay getting wet or being cold. Like you will push through that. So that's where like a good school climate can help mitigate some of those like mid-level barriers where you're sort of making a choice. Is it worth it to push through this or not?
And I guess we're talking senior leadership in the schools are really responsible for the climate and how that's set about. So this is where leaders can impact the most.
Yeah, and even just signaling that like it is important for us to have positive relationships with our students, because there are places, and again, like there's a logic to this. I'm not criticizing it in a way, is that, our job is to produce learning, and, maybe we're under pressure to get certain test scores or something for certain accountability systems. And so I'm putting all my time and effort to make sure that you can deliver a good lesson to the kids that show up. And that's what I signal to you. That's what matters. But I think, especially if the evidence is that we have pretty high chronic absenteeism, we have to say, yes, that's important. But if the kids aren't there on a regular basis to get that good lesson, we haven't really succeeded. And so we also have to pay attention to building those relationships, to creating a positive climate, to actually trying to address these barriers and deterrence.
So I know you've been talking about an evidence base there. Have you seen examples in schools or districts where they've actually built very good absentee data or bases and used that for data-informed decision making, so it actually gives a more precise input?
Yeah, I have. And there's a couple of key things in it, and it is a culture change. So one thing when you think about it, right, is that we're so used to, again, this, average daily attendance, the thing we look at. And maybe if we started to get chronic absenteeism data, it's sort of like we get data like how many kids are chronically absent last year, because it's an annual, in some places to be chronically absent, you have to miss 10% or more of the school year. We can't report that until the school year is done. So it's sort of it's a snapshot of a prior year. It's not that useful. So places that have made big differences are monitoring this in real time. And so it's like when you are in a trajectory to get to 10%, but you haven't got to 10% yet, we're already trying to figure out what can we do. Like, first thing is just to talk to the kid or the parents, like what's going on, and like trying to, and if you have a relationship or whoever has the strongest relationship, it's probably gonna get the best answer. So it's like if it's just September and October and you've already missed 5 days, we should be mobilizing. We shouldn't at least talking, because maybe we just find out, oh, I had pneumonia and I was out for a week. Okay, nope, good. Okay, we're good. That took us 10 seconds to verify that. Next kid, oh, well, let me tell you, this complicated situation has arisen. And you can know at that point, if you don't do anything, that situation is not going to change. That kid will miss 20 days, 25 days before the year is done. So places that have a big difference are progress monitoring kids on this at much more real time. And they're trying to move against, they're trying to figure out what's going on when folks are trending that way, not when they've actually arrived there. But then, the other ones that they some of the good things they do is that, they will, again, try to build these relationships. Some places they do home visits to a subset of kids where they need to really understand what's going on or have a better relationship with the parents. Nudge letters have been successful for that group of unaware students and kids. And oftentimes in the past, communications to parents about attendance were very official. Like, do you know it's against the law if you miss so much school and your kid is approaching, breaking the law? And again, that's shown not to be effective, particularly for parents that didn't have good experiences in school. Like they're like, oh, well, much more effective is just straight facts. We love having your child in school. We're so, it's so important for them to be here every day. We know you know that. We believe that. We just wanted to let you know that that there's been a it's a spike in attendance, and they're sort of trending towards missing 10% of the year, and that wouldn't be good for anybody. So how can we work together to and so that's just called a nudge letter. And that's just like a nudge, right? It's not like a hammer. It's not like you're bad. But it is that reminder that, they've actually missed a fair amount of school, and we should do something about it. And then another strategy that sometimes works is actually applying like peer supports in a way. So schools will take like an upper grade student in the U.S. system, like 12th grade or 11th grade, and the first year of high school is like 9th grade, and they will make them like the captain of a 9th grade homeroom. And they'll say, you're my team, and the first thing my team is they're here every day. And now you have a kid encouraging other kids to be there, and it's interesting because like they're often the most no BS people, because they're closer. They know that I know the games you're playing. I played them too. So there's a range of things people do, and the places that make the biggest difference do a combination of things. And again, that's because we see there's these range of reasons why kids aren't coming. So no single strategy will sort of cut across all of those areas.
So we've got something around identification of causes, monitoring that data in a real-time sense and getting in there, and then having a whole toolbox, if you like, of different ways of tackling those on an individual basis. And I guess watching for the longer-term elements in it. I'm just going to ask you a bit broad, since I've got your expertise in the room, which is kind of what can we do to change the school system if this is increasing, to make it more welcoming or to get people in. So I'm giving you a bit of blue sky here to work in with, because we didn't design this system for the modern day. We designed it for an era of when we needed conformism because the kids were going into factories often and stuff like that.
Yes, I think there's two things. One, I am this huge believer in this idea of school connectedness that we talked a little bit about, and really, if what percent of your students would say yes to all of these things? There is an adult that knows and cares about me as a person. I have a supportive peer group. I'm at least occasionally doing meaningful things that help other people, and I feel welcome for who I am. If we can work to increase that, we will I think dramatically improve our attendance, because that's really flipping both getting rid of some of these avoidance factors and some of these I don't see the point factors, and it's helping them push through some minor barriers. And that's just a sea change for schools to have to worry about that. Like very few schools, if you ask the headmaster or the school leader or the principal, what percent of your kids would answer yes to those? I don't think they'd have a clue in most cases. Because
we tend to focus on well-being because it's an easy question to ask.
Right. And they don't have this systems to collect it. But I argue it's not. This is actually not difficult to collect data. It doesn't require a huge operation to collect it. So that's on one side. I think. I do think for our secondary school kids, we do have to, and this is going to drive people crazy, make the affirmative case for why schooling matters in their life. That because we used to be able just to sell it that it might be boring, you might not like it, but if you buckle down, it'll help you get a post-secondary degree, and that will get you a better life. And so just suck it up, push forward, and you'll get through it, and then you'll get the golden ring down the road. And in many places,
stoic approach, I think that would
yes. And in many places, folks are like, I'm not so sure anymore. Like, there's a lot of debt associated with and I know this varies by country. Some countries are more progressive and have freer higher education, which is a good thing, but not everywhere has that. And it's sometimes you get debt. Many kids don't complete post-secondary for various reasons. So it's increased the skepticism that, like, I just have to suck it up and something good will happen.
And I guess a lot of kids are now following YouTube influencers and TikTok and stuff like that, where kids of their own age are making their living outside school already.
Right. So, making that affirmative case for why it matters.
And I guess that changes as well year on year, and also needs to keep being remade relevant to the age of the kids and the age and stage.
Yeah. And then the other one, and again, this will be a little bit controversial, is that, someone said this, I think it works. But like the analogy of smoking, and, when people smoke, it's what people instantly react to and don't like is the smoke, right? That's what's bothersome to people that are not smoking. But what's actually ultimately kills the smoker is the tar in the cigarette. And so the analogy is that it's, for many kids, it's bad they miss school, and we've talked about all these reasons. But what really throws them off track to succeeding in school is that idea of not getting their work done and the missed learning, sort of this, the learning loss that's now a new term for the pandemic. And so I think another thing, which wouldn't be the primary strategy, but sort of the backup strategy, is, and we're learning some of this from the pandemic, are there ways we can help those kids make up what they missed? That doesn't just say, like, well, you just got to do that school year again because you missed so much, right? With various advances of technology and whatever, are there ways we can facilitate some of the downsides of missing school? And I know it's controversial because they'll say, like, well, now you're enabling them to miss school because you're giving them a way to make it up. And I think that is a delicate balance, because I do think you want to make the proactive argument that let's make school a compelling place to be. Let's help you get through these barriers. It's better on multiple dimensions. But when that doesn't work, when the barriers are so strong or the circumstances are so, we haven't been able to crack them, I do think we need to have some sort of like recovery strategy from that doesn't say just sort of, well, it's sort of tough luck. You're sort of behind, and realistically, you will never catch up.
So, I think you've been incredibly practical there, Bob, and we've run right the way through what the issues are. Do you see it in the future, continuing to increase? I'm thinking of things like existence of Khan Academy and all sorts. There's other ways of educating yourself, let alone through a formal education. Homeschooling's on the rise.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question, right? Is how many people are going to find alternatives to school versus how many people will there be this bounce back? It's just taking a while. We are seeing some bounce back in the U.S. That, like, in the most recent school year, chronic absenteeism has gone down. It's still way above pre-pandemic levels. It's not. But I sometimes use the metaphor that, right after the pandemic, we had, the tide just rose. And so it got deeper in places that were already, underwater, and it reached places that were dry land before. And we are seeing a little bit of that receding. So I think at some level it will even out a little bit over time, but my guess is it will still be elevated to what it was post-pandemic. And that's the real challenge we have, is how to really address that. Because I think that's going to be at still too high a level that's really good for anybody. And we can't let it become the new normal, even as we recognize there are some of these alternatives. And again, that's a little bit different. Like, if kids actually are sort of withdrawing from school and finding alternatives, that's different than just like, I'm missing a day here, a day there, so I'm just struggling with this. I don't have that alternative. And it's sort of, as we said, it can really impact everybody.
Well, thank you so much for enlightening us deeper into this very, very strong issue. I always say the number one thing is if the children can't access education, then it is hugely problematical to their life chances in the future. So thank you.
And the thing just to keep in mind is it's very challenging, but it's something we can actually do something about. We'll never make it perfect, but we can make it much better.
Well, on that lovely note, I mean, thank you so much for your time, Professor Balfanz. I guess people can look out for your Johns Hopkins University and the other resources that you produce in this area.
Yeah, everyone graduate. Look up, just put Everyone Graduate Center in your search engine and you'll find us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your help and your participation.
My pleasure.